It's time now for business, starting with a look at the markets and firstly how things closed up in the US on Thursday. A very different story to the previous day on Wall Street, with all indices ending well into negative territory. The Nasdaq ending down 3.5%, the S&P 500 ending down almost 2.5 percentage points. The Dow Jones also ending down 1.75%. Well, as for Asia this Friday, everything very much trading in the red. The Nikkei in Tokyo down almost 3%, and the Shanghai Composite down almost 2%. The Hong Kong Hang Seng down 2.6%. The Kospi in Seoul, meanwhile, trading down 3.25% today. Well, for more on what we're seeing there, we can bring in Jamil Ahmad, Director of Investment Strategy at Naga. Jamil, what are we seeing? What's going on here exactly?
What we are seeing is increased sensitivity. We've had a couple of very negative days in the stock market this week. We've also had some good days too, but yesterday in particular was one of those red days, and by red days I mean there was losses across the board. The Nasdaq, for example, saw its worst losses since roughly October on a daily basis. Generally speaking, we've got so much hope now and good news that's coming through about the vaccines, about vaccines being distributed, and that hopefully the second half of this year economies will be able to reopen to the capacity that we remember it from early 2020 before this pandemic hit. And basically good news in this instance has actually led to bad news for the stock markets and stock market investors, because there are concerns that governments and central banks will be less accommodative to flexible policy as they've been used to during this pandemic. But I believe that those views are a little bit too much premature.
As you said, a few volatile days on the markets, with investors getting concerned about some steeper corrections on the horizon, possibly.
This is the big fear, and this is why we're seeing certain industries and certain sectors, such as the hospitality sector and the tourism sector, also the airlines specifically this week, have been more volatile, because these are the sectors that have been very depressed because of obviously having to be locked down now pretty much for close to 1 year. But essentially what we see from the market and specifically from investors is that there's going to be a great deal of challenges that are going to unfortunately remain after this pandemic. And with this, we also see that even one country, one major economy like the United Kingdom, that said they're going to reopen, hopefully, the second half of June, they will be finally be able to close its doors on this pandemic. But that's still a long time away. And I think that in this next couple of months, we will see volatile days on fears that things will get back to normal, that central banks will be less accommodative to flexible policy. But at the same point, when you've got over 10 million people unemployed in the United States, if the United Kingdom has vaccinated over 50 million people, but it's still going to be another 4 or 5 months until the economy reopens, it won't be a magic wand that's going to be switched and turned anytime soon or flicked in that way. And that's why I think that the market's been a little bit too overreactive and a little bit too reactive to the recent headlines. But we will see a bit more volatility. Overall, as long as central banks say that we're going to keep policy flexible, then the stock market sentiment should remain intact overall.
And Jamil, on this last trading day of the week, what should we be looking out for?
So interestingly, we have a number of finance ministers and also central bankers meeting, of course, virtually today, including the former Fed chair and the current U.S. Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen. And I think just any kind of reassuring tone from these policymakers and these figures that central banks will continue to support economies following these lockdowns could help staff what has been a couple of erratic days in the stock market. And essentially, this is the message that we need to see to kind of soothe fears. But I do believe that we're going to get that kind of narrative anyway, that there will be challenges that will remain economic following this pandemic. But nonetheless, we are very hopeful and optimistic these vaccines are working, and that hopefully the second half of 2021 will be a lot better for all of us.
Hear, hear. Jamil Ahmad, we'll look through the day's market news. Thank you very much.